push the community of advocates and agencies and governments work to keep that water clean, what some of the key risks are in the future that we're working on mitigating, and then how it influences some of our most iconic foods. So, at a glance here, New York City's water supply is the most important in the state. Serves over half of the state population. So that's all of New York City, as well as much of Westchester County, and as well as portions of Orange County, Ulster County, a little bit of Putnam County. So some of the Hudson Valley also benefits from the water from this system. About 1 billion gallons a day, which is hard to conceptualize, but it's a lot of water. 19 reservoirs, three controlled lakes, and these marvels of engineering, these aqueducts that carry that water from upstate reservoirs as far as almost 100 miles from the mountains down to the city. And with gravity, are able to actually serve the buildings in New York City up several floors without any pumping because of that long channel coming down from the mountains. It is the largest unfiltered water supply in the world. And I'll talk more about what that means as we go through this presentation because it's critical to Riverkeeper's role and how we try to make sure that that water supply is as good as it is and remains so into the future. So a brief history, if you go back into the early 1800s, New York, not only New York, but many communities were facing the issue that their local water supplies were becoming contaminated. We were contaminating our drinking water with our own wastes, and that was leading to disease outbreaks, acute illnesses, cholera being the most prominent among them. Thousands of people were dying in the early 1800s from a series of cholera outbreaks in New York City. That prompted the leaders at the time to look for an alternate water supply, which they found by damming the Croton River in Westchester County, creating the Croton Reservoir and the beginning of that water, that portion of the water system that still is active today in its current modern form. So that was in the 1840s. Fast forward half a century later, and the city needed more water and started looking again outside of its outside into the elsewhere in the state to find that water source and built the Ashokan Reservoir in the Catskill Mountains, the Catskill Aqueduct to connect that reservoir to the city, and the Schoharie Reservoir connected to the Ashokan. Then again, about a half a century later, the need arose again for yet more water, and that's when the Delaware portion of the reservoir system was developed. Several reservoirs in the western Catskill were put online, and the Delaware Aqueduct constructed. And significantly, those are the last reservoirs that were built, even though the population of New York has continued to grow and grow and grow from that time. That need for additional water was met by using less water. And the city has instituted exceptionally effective water conservation programs over the last several decades. Things like, low flush toilets, shower heads, finding and detecting leaks and eliminating leaks that have eliminated the need for additional reservoirs. So today we actually have greater population, but less water demand. And that's a really significant part of the story. It's important to note that these reservoirs weren't built without significant impacts where they were built. So there were whole communities that were displaced, farms inundated, communities inundated, and there's a legacy from that building that is still in the fabric of those communities in parts of upstate New York where the reservoirs are in existence. And it's important because New York City does not control the land all around the watershed that feeds into those reservoirs. We really rely on the collaboration of upstate communities and the city in a very effective but complicated relationship in order to keep the water clean. So that relationship really matters, it has mattered, and will continue to matter into the future. So I use that word watershed. Just want to make sure everyone understands what I mean when I say that. You'll hear it a lot when you hear about New York's drinking water supply. You'll hear New York City's watershed or the Delaware watershed, the Catskill watershed. A watershed is the land area that drains to a particular water body. So that could be around a little, a small watershed around a little stream. All the water that the rain that drops in that area will flow eventually to the stream. That's that stream's watershed. You see here Riverkeeper's mission area, which is all of the Hudson River watershed, as well as the watersheds that feed into New York City's drinking water supply. So you see those outlined on the right, the whole Hudson River watershed, as well as the Delaware, Catskill, and Croton watersheds, which are the three main components of the New York City system, which I described briefly in the earlier slide. So how do we keep this water clean? How do we make it safe and clean? And we rely on our New York City Department of Environmental Protection, which is the one that funds and manages watershed protection programs, with a lot of oversight from New York State agencies, which is a delegated authority from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, ultimately, which has an oversight role as well. So what does protection look like when you're talking about a watershed? You want clean streams, you want the natural filtration of the landscape of the forest to provide the filtration for that water. So water that's flowing over a natural landscape is naturally filtered. It's not picking up pollutants that we're adding to the landscape because the land is in a natural state. That's the most important facet of water protection is letting nature do what it does. So protecting land, especially along streams, is critical to that. There are also numerous programs to reduce pollution of various forms to make sure that those reservoirs stay clean. That's helping farmers control fertilizer and runoff. It's helping communities with roads and parking lots control and reduce the pollution that comes from those. It's building, operating sewage treatment plants, helping individuals upgrade septic systems that they have on their individual home lots, restoring streams, and much more. It's a multifaceted program. It's been operating for decades, and it's been extremely effective. It's been effective. It has extremely well-regarded benefits, this approach. First and foremost, it's producing safe water. We have federal and state laws that tell us exactly how much contamination is too much contamination and how clean is clean. And by and large, in most measures, New York City's watershed water is meeting those and does routinely. That's the most important thing. The water is clean and safe. It is also a fantastic money saver. We are in an era where affordability is the word of the day in many conversations. This is about as effective affordability program as you can imagine. The cost of filtering the water from the Catskill and Delaware water systems would cost as much as $20 billion to build a treatment plant, and then as much as $365 million every year to operate that plant. New York City spends $200 million in watershed protection. So a fraction of that cost every year. A huge investment, but a fraction of what would be needed if we were to use technology to do what nature does for us today. And lastly, and also significantly, we have a bioregional gem in the Catskill Mountains that is protected with those stream corridors, protected lands, recreational lands, and thriving areas for wildlife because of these protection programs. So what is Riverkeeper's role? Obviously, we are not the government. We're not the ones buying that land. We're not the ones, replacing the septic system that's failing. What we are doing is we're the watchdog, and we have a specific seat at the table that is unique among advocates because of our role in the history of protecting the water supply. It goes back to 1997 when a foundational agreement was struck to use watershed protection to protect the water rather than filtration. And Riverkeeper's had a seat at that table ever since that. We use that to make sure that the city, the state, the federal governments, local governments, private developments are held to the letter of the law and that they're addressing emerging threats. We're doing that all the time in numerous ways. Um, we are engaged in water quality monitoring, analysis of data, and advocacy on a number of fronts to understand threats and mitigate them, prevent them, mitigate them, make sure that that water stays as clean as it can be. Um, Significantly, we're also looking to advocate to understand what has worked so well in New York City and how we can apply those lessons to the rest of the state. Because if you look at, Peekskill, Ossining, Poughkeepsie, Albany, Troy, many communities in our state and in Riverkeeper's mission area have their own water supplies that are not New York City's water supply. And that means that those water supplies need protections too, and they need to benefit from some of the wisdom and practices that have been honed here in this worldwide example of how to do this well. We also recognize and work on the impacts that having those dams on those streams inevitably has to hold back that water. So if you look at the Esopus Creek, where the Ashokan Reservoir is situated, we've worked to make sure that the city's management of that reservoir is not degrading the stream downstream of the reservoir, and that the practices are in place and will be in place. We're still working on this to make sure that those streams are kept healthy. So we look at it at really multifaceted dimensions to make sure the water is safe, as well as the impact of having those reservoirs is limited to the greatest extent possible. And finally, and importantly, we rely on folks like you and we help folks like you take action when your voice matters on a decision. So, Riverkeeper, we're the watchdog, we're in the details. And when there is a time when 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people's voices will make a difference on a decision that's being made, we tell you. And that's why we need you on our email lists. It's why we need you on our social media so that you know when that moment comes. Because when we send the signal, it's strategic, it's the time, and it's when your voice will really make a difference. Some of those moments are going to be coming up in the next year. So this year is really critical because the state and city are negotiating what the next 10 years will look like for the watershed protection programs that are protecting the water supply. We are working in the middle of this with those partners and to make sure that the right issues are addressed and the right strategies are put in place to keep the water safe. That starts with maintaining our existing programs that have worked so well over the last 30 plus years. It also means developing some new programs because we do have new threats. Climate change is presenting new threats. It's changing the amount of water that's falling, the temperature of the water. That has countless effects on the water in the environment and what it takes to treat it and make sure that it stays safe. We also see the city has put out a really important report on the Croton watershed, that first water supply that it developed, and the rising levels of road salt affecting it. We are working on that to bend the curve so that we use less road salt to keep our roads safe, but without contaminating our drinking water supplies. A number of important emerging threats, but I'll just name those and let you know that we are working on them, and look out for communications from us through the year as these negotiations continue. With that, I'd like to turn it to our guest, Scott, who's going to tell us about why that water that flows out of the Catskill Mountains influences some of our favorite foods. Scott, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
I'm delighted to be here, Dan. Thanks a lot for having me, and thanks for going over that whole recap because this is obviously very important to me. When I give tours of pizzerias, we get questions about water every day, and we show those maps and we talk to people about the influence of water and where the water supply comes from. So thanks for the refresher. Now, I guess I'll jump right into the heart of why I know why you've invited me and why I think people are curious to talk about this is my interest in the water supply, besides being a New Yorker and somebody who's drinking it literally right now and standing directly in front of my own sink. This is an intentional decision for me to hang out in my kitchen today. Is I run tours of pizzerias around New York City, and just to give a brief background, because I'm assuming that there are a lot of people here who have not been on a tour with me or I don't know personally. I started giving pizza tours in 2008 at a time when I think interest in food by non-chefs was heavily on the increase. This is the Food Network era was already huge, and magazines were big, and food blogs were starting to become a much bigger deal. Food reporting was starting to change, was being more democratized by social media. It was just emerging. And when I started running the tours, the whole concept was I am obsessed with pizza. I love it. That's core. But I know that judging pizzerias as being good or bad or better or worse than somebody else, to me, is not sufficient. It's not enough information. I really like knowing, why is one place different from another? And then subjectively speaking, why do I like one more or less than the other? And so the answer comes down to history, science, technology, economics, politics in a lot of ways. And all those things are apparent in tomato production and harvest, dairy production, cheese production, and of course, the water supply. And the water supply is so crucial to pizza because dough without water is a pile of dust. Water is the catalyst for every chemical and biological reaction in pizza. And without water, there is no pizza, there's no bread. So it's really important to understand what water does beyond the maybe obvious fact that everybody's first question, if they're visiting New York from out of town, or if they are a New Yorker, is always, every day. I get it every day. And you're all thinking about it right now. You're mouthing it to yourself right now. Is New York City's pizza so good because of the tap water? And the answer to that is not a simple one. And it's one that really does require a lot of explanation, because the short answer is no, but the longer answer is yes. And even as I say that out loud, I'm confused by that. I want to explain myself. What I mean is this: New York's water is, as Dan just explained, very clean. The process by which it is brought from the mountains into New York City is incredible. It's a technical feat. It's wonderful. People have a misunderstanding of what that means for our pizza. So I want to explain how water influences pizza dough. And while I'm talking about it, it's not just pizza. It's bagels, it's bread, it's everything. It's dough. We'll just say dough. So first I want to give you a walkthrough of what water does in a pizza dough. And then I'll talk more about why having New York water doesn't automatically make your pizza incredible, but also why making pizza with clean water does give you a leg up. So I'll explain all that. Oh, and I'll also talk a little bit about how some of the aspects, the naturally occurring aspects of our tap water in New York City, are not ideal for pizza making and other bread making. So we'll go through all those things, keeping in mind that I am a huge proponent of like digging as deep as I can into the information. So let's lay out how dough works. Dough is essentially flour, water. That's essentially dough. And when you mix flour and water together, flour is milled down from wheat. It's mostly starch and carbohydrates and protein. When you add water to that flour, the proteins in the flour start to link together. There's two main proteins in flour. There's gliadin and glutenin. And when water is present, those two proteins start to link together and form bonds. Those bonds are called gluten bonds. So gluten is this elastic set of long protein bonds that make the dough extensible, but also elastic. Elasticity is what pulls it in, and extensibility is what allows you to pull the dough out. So gluten is what makes that happen. That's why if you make gluten-free dough, you can't pick it up on your knuckles and stretch it, because there are no bonds to hold it together. There's no gluten bonds. We use other things like gums to help keep it together. But with pizza dough, bread dough, bagel dough, dough in general, it's all about hydrating flour with water so that those bonds can start to form. Now, there's two other main ingredients in pizza dough, and potentially more than that, but flour and water are the main two. Yeast is added to ferment the sugars, the starch, naturally occurring in the flour. So yeast comes in and processes all those sugars. And as a byproduct, it spits out carbon dioxide, which makes the dough rise, and ethanol alcohol, which gives you flavor. So the idea behind yeast fermentation is that it's going to be breaking down complex sugars, and it's going to give you rise, it's going to give you flavor, and it's also going to provide some browning. Now, salt gets added in for a couple of reasons. Salt tames fermentation, it stabilizes it. It also helps tighten the gluten structure. So putting too much salt in is going to give you a dough that can't be stretched very easily. Too little makes a dough that ferments a little too widely. It might not be strong enough, and it won't be salty. Flavor is another aspect. So flour, yeast, water, salt are the four main ones. Some people will add oil, like we're looking at a picture of Joe's Pizza, and I'm staring at it right now because I'm a little hungry. But their pizza is interesting. That their pizza dough does have oil in it, and what oil does is, back in the old days when people were using wood-fired ovens and then later coal-fired ovens, you get this high intense heat which browns the dough. When we shift down to the ovens that you see in this picture, which are gas-fired ovens, it's a lower temperature, which means you don't get browning as quickly. Browning happens over a longer period of time. And over a longer period of time at a lower temperature like these ovens get, you're also not going to get you're not going to get browning. So one of the reasons that you prevent the lack of color and you prevent the lack of texture is by adding in oil. Oil gets in the way of some of those gluten bonds from forming. So imagine using oil for anything. Oil is going to prevent water from sticking, prevent two objects from sticking. So if you have this long gluten chain, putting oil into the mix is going to make shorter gluten chains. It's why other fats, like there's a fat called shortening. It's called shortening because it shortens those gluten strains, which means that you get more tenderness. So what water does is water makes all those combinations possible. And if your water supply was higher in mineral content than New York's, meaning that it would be a hard water, harder water makes for more less extensibility, more elasticity, a dough that's harder to stretch, a dough that doesn't absorb as much water as easily, a dough that's not ready to be used as quickly. And so that's why anywhere I go, wherever I travel, I always carry with me a TDS meter. This little meter measures total dissolved solids. And what that means is minerals that are present in your water, like calcium and magnesium, many others, but mostly those two, it's going to measure how many parts per million I have of those minerals. And if you get in the 100 to 200 parts per million range, that's sort of a sweet spot. It's a little on the heavy side. Above 200 is where you really get the hard water. And then below the 100 area, or really below 50, is where you get the soft water. So I was just in Los Angeles, and of course, I bring this with me wherever I go. And I remembered I measured a few years ago in Los Angeles, and I got 398 parts per million. That's hard water. That explains a little bit of why an untreated water system using that water will give you a dough that's going to need more time to rise. You might need more water. You might need more yeast in it. You have to adjust your formula because of the hardness of the water. Now, if you go to a place like New York City, where ours is usually around 44 parts per million, it explains a little bit of why the water is different. But I explain this because I think that some people make an assumption that when you brag about how New York City's pizza is so good, and you say, well, it's because of the water. One thing is you're thinking about, well, we do have this incredible water system. Our water is very clean. And as Dan just mentioned, it's unfiltered because we don't need to filter it. Clean, delicious, right out of the tap. On our tours, we send people a message when they buy their ticket. Please don't buy bottled water. Bring a refillable bottle, and I'll refill it at every pizzeria. Drink our tap water. It's great. But people have an assumption that New York's water is magical, and that must be because it has minerals in it that make it magical. Not realizing that it's the opposite. It's that we have very little in our water that makes it so great. So that means that any water supply can be changed, can be modified to give you some of the benefits of what we have in New York City, which is not extra minerals. You don't need to add anything. It's really subtracting things. You need less. If your water is lower in dissolved solids, then that's a good place to be. There's also the element of acidity. If the pH is below 7, if it's on the acidic side, slightly acidic water is beneficial for fermentation. Our water happens to be slightly alkaline. It's just whenever I measure, I'm getting like 7.2, 7.3, slightly alkaline, which means it's not exactly perfect, but it's not a big enough problem to make our pizza, bagels, and bread that bad. So that's why it's interesting when you look at the chemistry of what water is, it's never just hydrogen and oxygen. There's always other things going on. If you're in a part of the world where maybe you have well water, maybe it's saltier, maybe there's sodium in the water, you might have to knock down your salt content in your dough. So being a bread baker has always been sort of being a biologist and a chemist. It's really about science. And if you understand the science, then you as a bread baker don't have to rely on somebody else's recipe for how to make something. You rely on your own knowledge of how flour, water, yeast, and salt, and potentially fats like oil or shortening or butter, how they all interact. And that's why the best pizza makers, not just the ones in New York City, but the best pizza makers are able to make adjustments based on where they are. It's just in New York, it's pretty neutral. Our water is pretty neutral. So that's why it's not like our water is the silver bullet. And it's funny to talk about it because when people ask me on a tour, is New York's water the secret to the good pizza? I say, no, not at all. And I have to go back and explain that our water is excellent, but we have at least 2,300 pizzerias in New York City, at least. The number is it's really hard to figure out the exact number, but it's over 2,000 pizzerias. How many of those pizzerias are incredible? To me, it's around 3-4%. It's not that high. We have a lot of pizza in New York City, but a lot of the pizza in New York City is not amazing. And it's not because they're bringing in water from Texas. It's not because they're using bottled water. It's because they're not great pizza makers. And it just happens to be that pizza is a food that we treat like it's a fast food because it can be. And that means when you're desperate at 2 a.m, the pizza does not really have to be as good as the 3 or 4% of the pizzerias that I think are really incredible in New York City. By the way, 3 to 4% of 2,300, still a pretty good number. So our pizza is great. Our water is great. But the water is not the silver bullet. The silver bullet is understanding the chemistry. It just happens to be that having a water that's close to pH neutral and has low dissolved solid content happens to be a pretty good place to start. So it's just a quick background and my perspective and really scientific perspective of water and how it influences pizza. And by the way, I should mention this. Last week in Los Angeles, I did measure the water again in a hotel, and I found it to be 200 parts per million. Looked into it, and in the hotel, of course, they have water for purification happening, just basic filtration. If you have a water filter that you keep in the fridge, most of what that's doing is taking out dissolved solids, not removing much else. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention, which I definitely should, is chlorine. Chlorine is interesting because chlorine is going to kill off bacteria, which is a good thing. In the summertime, especially, our chlorine level in the New York City water supply, as it does everywhere else, it goes up a little bit because warmer temperature means you can have more bacterial development. So to prevent that bacteria from staying in the water supply, we up the chlorine a little bit. It's not a big deal for yeast. Yeast is a fungus. Fungus doesn't really care much about chlorine. But if you're making sourdough, and sourdough is a mixture of yeast, wild yeast that's in your kitchen, on your hands, in the flour, and bacteria, the bacteria will have a problem with a really high chlorine content water. So there are places I've traveled where I'll smell the water right out of the tap. Oh, wow, get the chlorine hit right away. If you're in a place like that and you get the chlorine hit, which I'm not getting right now, it's winter, it's a little bit lower this time of year. If you ever have a lot of chlorine, you can just leave water in a pitcher sitting out for a few hours. The chlorine dissipates. So whenever I make pizza, I tend to pour my water out of the tap the night before, refrigerate it. My kitchen gets pretty hot. Right now it's 77 degrees. If I'm making dough, I like to use cooler water because then I can let it ferment for a longer time. That gives me better flavor. So I'll let the chlorine dissipate. Beyond that, chlorine is not something to worry that much about. When I've traveled through Europe, I'll be in some parts of Europe, no chlorine in the water, or at least that's the reporting on it. And the pizza's terrible. Low dissolved solid content, the pizza's still terrible. At the end of the day, there's no one silver bullet ingredient. It's really about being a good baker. But New York City is in a great place where we have incredible bagels, incredible pizza, great bread, but it's because we have a long history of those products and an understanding on the baker's side of the biology and of the chemistry. And so on a pizza tour, when that question comes up, I can give about a tenth of that answer because I would love to pull out the big chart and talk all about it, but I carry around the TDS meter. I'll carry around a pH meter, and we'll talk about what that all means and then how it does or does not impact the pizza. And then I'll remind people that there is really good pizza outside of New York City. And as Dan mentioned before, it's not like this water supply ends at the five boroughs marks. It goes into Westchester, into the counties above north of Westchester, and nobody is saying that their pizza up there is identical to pizza within New York City. There's a mental block about it. It could be identical. I've had incredible pizza in Westchester that's better than 96% of the pizza in the five boroughs in New York City. So even though I feel like my job as a New York City pizza tour guide, pizza tour company operator is to defend our magic of New York City's water supply, the magic of the water is not responsible for the great pizza, but it is a huge part that makes great pizza much simpler to achieve than if you're in a place that has worse water. So on that note, maybe we'll open it up and see if there's some questions. Dan, I know you've probably been looking at the chat and the Q&A. I have not looked at them, but if there's any questions, I'd love to dig into it.
There was a question about whether any of our water flows to other states, or I'm sorry, if we share our water with any other states. And I'll just briefly that answer's in the chat, but I think interestingly, I'm not aware of pipes that connect any communities, but the water flows. So the Hudson River watershed, you remember that map I showed earlier? Portions of our watershed are in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Jersey. That water flows ultimately reaches the Hudson. The Hudson River is itself a water supply for 100,000 people, my neighbors, Poughkeepsie, Rhinebeck, Hyde Park, and other communities in the area. There's other examples as well, but we have to remember that the water doesn't stop. It flows through and does serve many of us. But a question for you, Scott, is wanted to hear more about chlorine in the water. This person says they do, well, maybe it's for me. They have chlorine taste in their water, and they live in Cortland, which is a community in Westchester County that does draw off of the New York City system. So my understanding is that while there are many Westchester communities that are drawing off of the New York City system, they have their own treatment plants. So the treatment that happens in your community is happening locally. So that would be, a chlorine that is added in that town rather than to the whole New York City supply in that case. And then we have a question about climate change and how that might affect the water supply. So a couple of key ways. So, increasing temperature. We know that the temperature is going to increase in the air. We don't have great data or models or projections of how much water temperatures will increase, but we know they will increase. They have increased. They will continue to increase. The warmer the water, the more life will grow within it. So that means algae and other microorganisms like that will have a better conditions to grow more, and those can have important impacts, and they are having important impacts in our water supplies. Not necessarily in New York City's as much as other places, but we have harmful algal blooms as a chief concern. Some it's actually a bacteria, but we call it algae, I'll just say. But harmful algal blooms can produce toxins. We had an episode on the Hudson River this past summer where we had an extensive harmful algal bloom, and the communities that draw drinking water from the Hudson had to adjust their treatment to protect their communities and make sure that the toxins produced by that algae wasn't reaching tap water. The algae itself, even if it's not harmful, can affect the quality of water by changing the taste and the odor, and also by introducing just organic matter that reacts with chlorine when it is used and can create byproducts that are harmful. That's one way. The temperature of the water, also as precipitation patterns change, we're getting more extremes. So more droughts, which can lead to higher water temperatures and all those issues I just mentioned, as well as bigger storms coming in short bursts, high intensity rain. That can cause an intense runoff, washing certain pollutants into our waterways and contributing to the underlying pollution that can also fuel those algal blooms. So in broad strokes, it's changes in precipitation and higher temperatures, and those have a kind of cascading effect on a number of variables in water quality that are meaningful when you're talking about protecting public health and tap water. Now, a question for you, Scott. Which neighborhoods have the best pizza? Let's
In the
hear it.
five boroughs, West Village and Williamsburg, Brooklyn. So in the West Village and Williamsburg, Brooklyn, both neighborhoods have a diversity in pizza styles. So not just a bunch of New York slice shops, but different styles. If you're in the West Village, obviously there's the old school places. There's John's on Bleecker. It's been around since over 100 years. And then there's Joe's, which we just saw the picture of. And then there's Mama's 2, Lindustry, and Numero 28. All these amazing places that are opening. There's a place that opened up 3 months ago called Fermento on Varick Street. It's incredible. That neighborhood is probably the best in the whole city. We do 3 or 4 walking tours in that neighborhood per week because there's so much variety. Every tour is different. So based on the questions that we get in the group, we'll take people to different places, but there's like so many options. Williamsburg, same thing. In Williamsburg, you have more experimentation, fewer of the old school places. It's more of the new school experimental. There's a Lindustry over there. There's Feeney. There's Leo, which is full sourdough. There's Aces for Detroit style. It's awesome. Moe's General for squares. It's just awesome. I mean, there's other neighborhoods that have great pizza. Like historically, Italian neighborhoods, Bensonhurst and Bay Ridge, still a lot of good pizza over there. It's just not as diverse in style. So when I think of a great pizza city or a great pizza neighborhood, I'm thinking of diversity, number of pizzerias, and quality. It's got to be those three all together. It can't just be, oh, well, there's one great pizzeria in my neighborhood, Flatbush. One great pizzeria does not make a great pizza neighborhood. I don't live in a great pizza neighborhood. A couple neighborhoods away, better pizza, so I'll travel.
What is the most number of slices of pizza you have eaten in a day?
In a day, I'm pretty careful. I track how much pizza I eat, so I really am careful. Like lately, I stick to a limit of 15 slices per week. I'm gonna pull up my slice tracker. My slice tracker is just a Google sheet, and I track where I go. Yellow means it's the first time I've been to that pizzeria. So here's when I was out of town. Here's a couple, in New York, new places. And I keep myself to 15 slices a week, but there's a system that allows me to go over, but there's a penalty for the next week. So every single slice that I go above my limit, I subtract 2 from the next week. So it's not like I can just have 100 slices one week and then make up for it throughout. That's going to really hurt. So if I had 10 extra slices this week, it means I have to go to -5 slices next week, which, you know what I mean? So the answer to your question is I probably had 13 or 14 slices in a day. But that means with my system that I've had since 2009, that's not a good place to be.
Right. And then you're extreme on moderation from there on out.
Yeah, and can
So
you imagine having to run a pizza tour and not have any slices? It's terrifying.
I can neither imagine that nor eating 15 slices in a week, but I give it to you. You're the expert. And I want to remind everyone the webinar is being recorded and do not share it with my son because I cannot set that bar. We've got to keep them five slices. Anyway, next question. What about New York City versus New Haven pizza, the classic rivalry? Where do you stand?
Well, in terms of the water, like again, I'll just repeat that the water is not. Somebody was canning New Haven water and then selling it with a pizza dough recipe, and so I made that, and then I made pizza with my tap water, and I A/B'd them, and there were some structural differences, and there was an element of flexibility difference, but when you're eating them, there was no difference. So the water really does not seem like it's making a difference. Now, where I stand personally between the New Haven and New York, they are different. To put them against each other and to say that one must be better than the other is personal. That's like if you like the Mets or the Yankees. It's like that's a personal. That's like how you were raised. You know, if you grew up in that area in Connecticut, you're a Pepe's family or a Sally's family or a Modern family, or maybe you're in Zupardi's in West Haven. All that, I don't want to get in the conversation. I will say this though. I had a long conversation yesterday with a buddy of mine who does pizza tours in New Haven. Every year we team up and do a tour together every October. So if you're in New York City and you want to venture up, we haven't announced it yet. We're going to announce it next week. We're going to do every year we do a full day trip up to New Haven and back. We hit five or six pizzerias up there and then drive back and pass out on the way back. But I love New Haven pizza. I just there's not a there's not a qualitative difference. It's really a quantitative difference in texture, and really comes down to those two famous places, Pepe's and Sally's. Beyond those two, there's not enough common threads among the other well-known places to me that really make it a cohesive style, which I know is maybe controversial to say, but Pepe's and Sally's, if you think of those as New Haven style, it's absolutely phenomenal. One of my favorite styles, and you got to get it with no topping, no mutts, nothing. Tomato, garlic, pecorino, done.
Okay. And I
Mm.
mean, really, when you have 15 slices a week, you don't have to choose favorites so much. You get a chance to have a second favorite, a third favorite, a fourth favorite, and you still have some margin. So a question from Paula. Um, what, are there other factors other than water that make pizza and bagels so good in New York City? How did it get that reputation? Is that just New York marketing on top of all of this, or is it something else?
So there's two things going on. One great thing is hindsight rationalization. It's These things are true. New York City has great pizza and great bagels. We also have great water, right? There's a correlation there, but without causation, because we do have also bad pizza, and there is great pizza that rivals, and I would say is as good as New York outside of the boroughs and the water serving area. Now, the reasons that New York is so well known for pizza is more of a city planning reason. And it's the fact that, especially in Manhattan, the grid pattern and tight real estate bundles, small 450 square foot units, make running a restaurant that serves pizza really economically viable to the owner, because you can have a tiny footprint. You can have a couple of ovens and a mixer. It takes up very little space relative to other large restaurants, and then not have to pay rent for seating for your customers. New York did not really become famous for pizza until the 1940s. And the term New York style was never used until the 1940s. What happens in the 1940s? The introduction of the gas-fueled deck oven, those big metal ovens we saw in the picture before at Joe's. When those ovens happen, lower temperature, which means you get a longer bake, which means you can bake pizzas, reheat them on service, and then the person can take it and walk out the door eating it by the slice. The by the slice thing wasn't really common in New York City until the gas oven in the 40s. So that's why I say it's a city planning issue. New York is known for pizza. You might say, well, why can't I get a good slice of pizza in LA? And it's because Southern California is designed around highways. You're in a car. We New Yorkers are on foot all the time, even if it's a blizzard outside. It's you're in the subway, you're walking, you're not driving around, which means a slice shop is a viable economic opportunity. And that's why to say, oh, you can't get a good slice outside of New York is not false. You can get a good slice out of New York, but it's way more common in New York because of the way that we live. It's a pedestrian culture. So I blame that more on city planning than I blame on one ingredient.
Thank you. And we have one more question here that's on the quality side, not the pizza side. That's an important one about concern about pipes and lead pipes and what that can do to tap water. So lead is a very important contaminant. We were focused, I was focused in our presentation on protecting the sources of our water. But as that water comes through the distribution system, the pipes that reach our homes and our taps, some of those pipes are old. They are made out of lead and they can leach lead into the water. Lead is a neurotoxin, unsafe at any level, effect, especially important to avoid exposure for young children and women who are pregnant and may become pregnant because they can pass that on to their kids. So the question is what to do if you have a concern. There's a free testing program that the city runs. Starts with calling 311. Call, get a test, and then find out where you're at and take the actions that are recommended from there. But thank you for that question. Very important one. And there is a follow-up actually to the question about what makes New York pizza so good. So, thinking about the mix of what makes the city have the reputation and the good where it is good, the good pizza. What other places are on your map, and how many would you say, have as much of a worthwhile reputation that's worth exploring? Where else would you point us?
So I actually have a whole, well, it's not exactly a list of favorites, but I have a list on my website of places where we take tour guests. And the reason why I say it's not necessarily my favorites is that there are some pizzerias missing from that list because they're not logistically viable for the tour. So I can't take a tour to the southern tip of Staten Island. I can't take it. New Park Pizza is a place I really like. It's not on my list on my website because it's just too far out in on where is it? Anyway, right by JFK. That's where it is. So other places that I really like in the city. Oh, I should mention it's scottspizzatours.com/pizzerias. That's where I have that list. But other places that I definitely recommend, and it's hard to really generalize this. So if you have a neighborhood and you want to drop your neighborhood in the chat, then that helps me a lot. But there's a place called Frico on Second. That's Upper East Side. Just opened up maybe a year and a half ago. That's great. I'm thinking about neighborhoods that are not typically thought to have great pizza. Upper East Side, not great pizza. That place is very good. Then there's a place in that same neighborhood called Lucia, Lucia, which original location is on Avenue X in Marine Park, Brooklyn. And they have another location in Gramercy and one right by the Holland Tunnel on Canal Street. That's a great place. And then there's Weeded in Ditmas Park, not far from where I live in Flatbush. Weeded, another great place. I'm trying to think of pizzerias in non-obvious locations. But if you have a location that you want me to throw a recommendation at, just drop it, I guess, in the chat.
All right. Well, I have included in the chat some of the links that we talked about in the presentation. These are actually I didn't talk about. Let me talk about very quickly. Riverkeeper has an excellent new portion of our website where we display water quality data and a number of other important data sets and information about water quality, including a whole feature on drinking water. So whether you live in New York City or anywhere around New York State and in the Hudson River watershed, go to data.riverkeeper.org. You can find where your water comes from. You can start to learn about what issues, if any, it has, and start to explore solutions. So I encourage you to check that out and explore it. We also have content on our website about New York City's drinking water supply, covering some of the same things that I addressed in the presentation, riverkeeper.org/NYC drinking water, all one word. And then finally, as I mentioned, the next year is going to be important for the future of New York City's drinking water. And there are water issues, unfortunately, all of the time that we need to work on and activate you as caring people who want to see good things happen. So go to riverkeeper.org/take action. That's all one word, take action. And you will find active actions that you can take today. It's usually sending a message to the governor, sending a message to our legislators, sending a message to other decision makers at a key moment that can influence a decision. So you always know when Riverkeeper asks you to do something, it's strategically important, and it's not just a petition you sign on the street or you'd have no idea what happens to it. This is to drive a change that is meaningful. So please look for those. You can sign up for our emails and look for us on social media at Riverkeeper, and you can follow along there. So I encourage you to do that. And then also, Scott, we want to let people know about your tour again. So can you give us that um, web address again? It's scottspizzatours.com.
Yeah, exactly right. scottspizzatours.com, and it's Scott's Pizza Tours across social media, Instagram, TikTok, all those things.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Scott. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot and I've had, I'm hungry. I ate lunch already and I'm still hungry. I wasted myself on a bowl of soup. What was I thinking? I should have waited and gone out and inspired by this, gotten the lousiest slice of pizza I could find closest to me or the best. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I want to thank everyone in attendance for being here. And with that, I think we'll close the webinar. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Man, thanks for having me.